The red dust of Willow Creek settled on everything like a stubborn memory. It coated the weathered boards of the saloon, dulled the shine of spurs, and turned the horizon into a hazy line between earth and sky. The year was 1882, and the small frontier town sat like a tired dog beside the unfinished railroad tracks that promised prosperity but delivered only more dust and disappointed dreams. Emma Hartley wiped down the scarred wooden tables at Morrison's boarding house with practiced efficiency, her movements precise and careful. She kept her sleeves rolled down despite the afternoon heat. And when old Pete Henderson reached out to pat her shoulder in thanks for refilling his coffee, she stepped back smoothly, as if she'd merely turned to fetch the pot. "Peculiar girl," Pete muttered to his companion, not unkindly. "Been here near 2 years now, still jumpy as a Mustang." The other man, a traveling merchant, lowered his voice. "Heard tell she came from back east. Some say there was trouble with her family." "Some say too much," Pete replied. But his eyes followed Emma with curiosity as she moved between tables, always maintaining that invisible boundary around herself. Outside, the sound of hooves and men's voices announced the arrival of new visitors. Through the grimy window, Emma glimpsed a group of riders leading a string of horses down Main Street. Cowboys, by the look of them, probably heading to the Rockingham Ranch outside town. She turned away, focusing on her work, but the boarding house door swung open with a bang that made her flinch. "Mrs. Morrison here?" The voice was deep but not harsh, carrying the easy confidence of someone comfortable with wide-open spaces. Emma kept her back turned, busying herself with the coffee pot. "She's at the general store. You need a room?" "Might do. Depends on how long Mr. Mitchell needs us at his ranch." Boot steps crossed the floor, stopping at a respectful distance. "Name's Jack Kavanaugh. My men and I just brought in some horses from Colorado." Emma turned slightly, just enough to see him from the corner of her eye, tall and lean, with sun-weathered features and dark hair that needed cutting. His hat was in his hand, a gesture of politeness not all cowboys bothered with. What struck her most were his eyes, steady and watchful, but without the calculating look she'd learned to fear. "Mrs. Morrison should be back soon," she said, still not facing him fully. "You can wait if you like." "Appreciate it." He moved to a table near the window, choosing a seat that let him see both the door and the street. A cautious man, but not paranoid. "Been a long ride. That coffee I smell?" Emma nodded, reaching for a clean cup. As she approached his table, she saw his hands resting on the worn as wood, scarred and capable, but relaxed. She set the cup down quickly, pulling back before there was any chance of accidental contact. Jack noticed. Of course he did. Men who survived in this country noticed everything. But instead of commenting or reaching out to steady the cup as it rattled slightly on the table, he simply said, "Thank you, Miss Emma," she said quietly, surprising herself. She rarely offered her name. "Miss Emma." He poured the coffee himself, the steam rising between them like a small barrier. "You been in Willow Creek long?" 2 years come September." "Like it?" The question was simple, but Emma heard the genuine curiosity in it. Most men asked questions to fill silence or to lead somewhere. This felt different. She paused, considering. "It's far from everything." Jack nodded slowly. "Sometimes that's what a person needs." Their eyes met for just a moment before Emma looked away. There was understanding in his gaze that made her uncomfortable, as if he could see past the careful walls she'd built. The afternoon wore on. Jack's men filtered in, dusty and tired, filling the boarding house with their rough voices and laughter. Emma served them efficiently, dancing around grasping hands and careless gestures with the skill of long practice. Jack watched it all from his corner table, his expression thoughtful. When Mrs. Morrison finally returned, a stout woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense manner, she took in the scene with a practiced eye. "Jack Kavanaugh, heard you were coming through with horses for Mitchell." She shook his hand firmly. "You need rooms?" 4, if you got them. Week at least, maybe 2. As they negotiated terms, Emma began clearing tables. She was reaching for Jack's empty cup when one of his men, a younger cowboy with whiskey on his breath, grabbed for her wrist. "How about some company tonight? Pretty girl?" Emma jerked back so violently she knocked over a chair. The crash silenced the room. She stood frozen, her face pale, breathing hard. "Thompson." Jack's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Outside! Now!" The younger man started to protest, but something in Jack's eyes stopped him. He lurched to his feet and stumbled out, muttering under his breath. "I apologize for him, Miss Emma." Jack said quietly, "It won't happen again." Emma nodded stiffly, bending to right the chair with shaking hands. She was painfully aware of everyone watching, of the whispers starting already. The strange girl, the one who couldn't bear to be touched. What was wrong with her? What had happened to make her so peculiar? Later, as the sun painted the sky in shades of red and gold, Emma stood on the boarding house's back porch, trying to calm her racing heart. She didn't hear Jack approach until he spoke. "I sent Thompson to sleep in the stables, told him if he so much as looks at you wrong, he'll be walking back to Colorado." Emma gripped the porch railing. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." His voice was firm but gentle. "Man's gotta respect boundaries, whether he understands them or not." The word boundaries hung in the air between them. Emma felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "People think I'm strange," she whispered. "People think a lot of things. Doesn't make them true." Jack leaned against the other end of the railing, maintaining that careful distance. "We all got our reasons for being how we are." Emma looked at him then, really looked at him. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter, but also of loss. A thin scar ran along his jaw. His hands bore the marks of hard work and harder choices. "I'm afraid to be touched," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. It was the first time she'd said it aloud to anyone. Jack didn't flinch or look pitying. He just nodded slowly, as if she'd told him the sky was blue or the desert was dry. "Then I'll hold your heart first," he said simply. Emma's breath caught. The words should have sounded like a line, something a smooth-talking cowboy might say to charm a girl. But the way Jack said them, quiet and sure, made them feel like a promise. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Don't reckon you have to, not yet." He straightened, putting his hat back on. "I'll be around for a while. Maybe we can talk sometimes. If you're willing, no touching, just talking." Emma found herself nodding before she could think better of it. As Jack walked away, spurs jingling softly in the evening air, Emma touched her chest where her heart was beating hard and fast. For the first time in 2 years, it wasn't entirely from fear. The red dust of Willow Creek continued to settle on everything, but somehow it seemed less suffocating now. In the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon, and the sound didn't seem quite as lonely as it usually did. Inside the boarding house, Mrs. Morrison watched from the window, a knowing look in her eyes. She'd seen all kinds of people drift through her establishment over the years. The broken ones, the running ones, the ones looking for something they couldn't name. Maybe, just maybe, these two had found what they were looking for without even knowing they'd been searching. The night settled over the frontier town like a familiar blanket, bringing with it the sounds of the saloon piano, distant laughter, and the ever-present whisper of wind across the empty plains. And in the kitchen of Morrison's boarding house, Emma Hartley went about her evening chores with the ghost of something that might have been hope flickering in her chest. Fragile as a candle flame, but stubborn as the red dust that touched everything in Willow Creek. The nightmare always began the same way. The acrid smell of smoke, her mother's scream cut short, the sound of breaking glass. Emma woke with a gasp, her nightgown damp with sweat, hands clutching the thin blanket. Through her small window, she could see the first pale light of dawn creeping across the prairie. 2 weeks had passed since Jack Kavanaugh arrived in Willow Creek. 2 weeks of careful conversations, of him sitting at his corner table each evening, telling stories of the trail while she worked. He never pressed, never reached out, just offered his quiet presence like a gift she could accept or refuse. Emma dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, her fingers automatically checking that every button was fastened, every inch of skin covered despite the growing heat of late summer. The memory pushed at her consciousness, demanding attention. She'd been 17 when the raiders came to their homestead outside Topeka. Her father had tried to fight them off, but there were too many. They'd shot him on the front porch while Emma and her mother huddled inside. Then they'd broken down the door, and everything had become chaos and terror. Emma shook her head sharply, forcing herself back to the present. She had work to do. Mrs. Morrison would be expecting breakfast ready for the boarders soon. In the kitchen, she lost herself in the familiar rhythm of cooking. Biscuits in the oven, bacon sizzling in the pan, coffee brewing strong and black. The routine helped push the memories back into their dark corners. "You're up early, even for you." Emma startled but managed not to drop the eggs she was holding. Jack stood in the doorway, fully dressed despite the hour. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, turning back to the stove. "Makes two of us." He moved to his usual table, maintaining that careful distance he always kept. "Mind if I ask you something?" Emma tensed. "Depends on what it is." "Fair enough." She heard him pull out a chair. "Was wondering if you might like to learn to shoot." The eggs slipped from her hands then, splattering on the floor. Emma stared at the mess, remembering other hands, cruel hands, and a voice saying she'd never need to defend herself because she'd never get the chance. "I'm sorry," Jack said quickly. "Didn't mean to upset you." Emma grabbed a cloth, kneeling to clean up the eggs. "Why would you teach me that?" "Because knowing how to protect yourself and being afraid are two different things. Sometimes knowing helps with the afraid part." She looked up at him then. He was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, that steady gaze full of understanding. "I had a gun once," she whispered. "Couldn't make myself use it when it mattered." "You were young, scared. No shame in that." Emma stood slowly, disposing of the ruined eggs. "I wasn't just scared. They held me down while my mother..." She couldn't finish, couldn't speak the words that would make it real again. Jack's hands clenched on the table, the only sign of his reaction. "How long before help came?" 3 days. The words came out flat, emotionless. "They finally left when they heard cavalry approaching. By then, Mama was gone. Fever took her. I tried to help her, but I couldn't stand to..." She gestured helplessly at herself, at the body that had been violated, that had become a thing she could barely tolerate living in. "The marshal found me hiding in the root cellar, took me to town, to the doctor. Everyone was very kind." Her laugh was bitter, so kind they couldn't look at me. "The minister's wife gave me money to go somewhere no one knew what had happened. Start fresh," she said. "So you came here." "So I came here." Emma turned back to the stove, starting new eggs with hands that barely trembled. "And I swore no one would ever touch me again." The kitchen was quiet except for the sizzle of cooking food. Outside, a rooster crowed, announcing the new day. "My brother died because he couldn't defend himself," Jack said finally. Not wouldn't, couldn't. He was simple-minded. You see, sweet as sunshine, but with a child's understanding. Some men in a saloon thought it was funny to make him dance by shooting at his feet. He fell wrong, hit his head. Emma turned, seeing the old pain etched in Jack's features. "I taught myself to shoot after that. Taught myself a lot of things. Not for revenge, just to never be that helpless again." He met her eyes. "That's all I'm offering. Knowledge, choice, nothing more." The morning sun slanted through the window, painting golden stripes across the floor. Emma found herself nodding slowly. Whenever you're ready. We can go out past Miller's Pond where no one goes. You don't have to touch the gun until you want to. We can start with just watching, understanding how it works." "All right," Emma said softly. "Mrs." Morrison chose that moment to bustle in, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. "You two are up with the chickens." "Jack Kavanaugh. You trying to steal my help? No, ma'am, just enjoying the quiet morning. Mrs. Morrison snorted but said nothing more, moving to help Emma with breakfast preparations. As the other boarders began to filter in, the kitchen filled with noise and activity, but Emma felt the promise of that conversation settle into her bones like strength she didn't know she could borrow. That afternoon, while the heat shimmered off the dusty streets, Emma found herself walking beside Jack toward the outskirts of town. She kept careful distance between them, but for the first time, it felt less like fear and more like choice. At Miller's Pond, really just a muddy watering hole with pretensions. Jack showed her his Colt .45, handling it with the casual competence of long familiarity. He explained each part, how it worked, why it mattered. Emma watched from several feet away, arms wrapped around herself despite the heat. Fear's not a bad thing, Jack said, demonstrating how to load the chamber. Fear keeps us alive out here. It's when fear controls us that it becomes a problem. Easy for you to say, Emma muttered. No, Jack said simply. It's not. Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. There were shadows in his eyes she hadn't noticed before. Depths of experience that matched her own. Will you show me? She asked. Jack nodded, turning to face a row of bottles he'd set up on a fallen log. His draw was smooth, economical. The bottles exploded one by one, 6 shots, 6 hits. It's not about being fast, he said, reloading. It's about being sure, about knowing you can if you need to. Emma stepped closer, drawn despite herself. Could I try holding it? Not shooting, just... Jack immediately set the gun on a flat rock and stepped back. It's there when you're ready. Emma approached the weapon like it might bite. Her hands shook as she reached for it, remembering other hands, cruel hands. But the metal was just metal, warm from the sun, heavier than she expected. She lifted it carefully, feeling its weight, its potential. You're doing fine, Jack said quietly from behind her. Emma raised the gun, sighting down the barrel at the remaining bottles. Her fingers stayed clear of the trigger, but she imagined it. Imagined having this power that night. Imagined being able to fight back. Tears ran down her face, but her hands stayed steady. I couldn't save her, she whispered. I couldn't save my mother. You saved yourself, Jack said. That took more courage than any shooting. Emma lowered the gun, setting it back on the rock with careful precision. When she turned, Jack was there, still maintaining that respectful distance, but close enough that she could see the understanding in his eyes. Thank you, she said. We can come back whenever you want. Or not. Your choice. As they walked back to town, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon, Emma felt something shift inside her chest. Not healing, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. The prairie stretched out around them, vast and unforgiving, but for the first time in 2 years, it didn't feel like a place to hide. It felt like a place to learn to live again. That evening, as she served dinner to the boarders, Emma caught Jack watching her with that quiet, steady gaze. When she refilled his coffee, she let her fingers brush the handle of the pot just as his hand reached for it, not touching, but close, closer than she'd let anyone in so long. Same time tomorrow? He asked quietly. Yes, Emma said, and meant it. Outside, the coyotes called to each other across the darkening plain, and the wind whispered secrets through the grass. And in the kitchen of Morrison's boarding house, Emma Hartley cleaned dishes with hands that had held a gun that day. Hands that were learning they could be strong again. The drought had settled over Willow Creek like a curse. 3 weeks without rain had turned the already dusty town into a powder keg of tension and thirst. The water level in the town well dropped daily, and Morrison's boarding house, like every other establishment, had to ration carefully. Emma watched Jack lead his horses to the communal trough, noting how he let each animal drink only briefly before moving them along. His men grumbled, but they followed his example, in a land where water meant survival. Such discipline marked the difference between a good leader and a dead one. That's barely enough for them, she said, approaching with a bucket she'd drawn for the kitchen. Jack patted his mare's dusty neck. "It'll do. They're tough stock, bred for hard country, unlike some of these town horses that have gotten soft." It was late afternoon, the sun brutal in a cloudless sky. Emma had taken to wearing a wide-brimmed hat Mrs. Morrison had given her, but the heat still pressed down like a physical weight. She set her bucket down, careful to stay beyond arm's reach as always. "Thompson's been talking," Jack said quietly, not looking at her. "About you. About why you are the way you are." Emma's stomach clenched. "What's he saying?" "Nothing worth repeating. I've warned him twice. Won't be a third time." Despite the heat, Emma shivered. She knew how quickly rumors could spread in a small town, how they could twist and grow until the truth was unrecognizable. She'd fled one town because of such whispers. "Maybe I should..." "Should what? Run again?" Jack turned to face her then, his expression fierce. "You've done nothing wrong. Emma, nothing?" The intensity in his voice made her step back instinctively. Jack immediately softened his tone. "I'm sorry. It just makes me angry. People talking about things they don't understand." He removed his hat, running a hand through sweat-dampened hair. "Would you walk with me, just to the edge of town and back, public as can be?" Emma hesitated. Being seen with Jack would fuel more gossip, but hiding would only make things worse. "All right." They walked slowly down Main Street, Emma carrying her water bucket, Jack leading his mare. People watched from doorways and windows, some nodding greeting, others whispering behind hands. Emma kept her eyes forward, chin raised. "You're doing fine," Jack murmured, like a queen reviewing her subjects. "Despite everything." Emma almost smiled. "I've never felt less royal." "Royal's got nothing to do with blood and everything to do with bearing." They passed the saloon where a group of cowboys lounged on the porch. Thompson was among them, his eyes following Emma with an unpleasant gleam. Jack's hand moved casually to rest on his gun belt, and Thompson looked away. At the town's edge, where the buildings gave way to open prairie, they paused. The landscape stretched endlessly, brown grass and red earth beneath a merciless sky. "My family had a ranch in Texas," Jack said, gazing out at the horizon. "Lost it in the panic of '73. Bank took everything. My father never recovered from that. Died of shame more than anything else." Emma set down her bucket, the water precious but her arms tired. "Is that when your brother..." "Year later, we were drifting, taking work where we could find it. I was supposed to watch out for him." Jack's voice carried old guilt like a stone. "Stepped out of that saloon for 5 minutes to check the horses. That's all it took. It wasn't your fault." "No? I was his older brother, his protector, and I failed." Jack looked at her then. "Just like you think you failed your mother." The parallel hit Emma like a physical blow. "That's different." "Is it?" "We both survived something that killed someone we loved. We both carry guilt for being the one who lived." Emma felt tears threaten and blinked them back fiercely. Out here in the open, with the whole town potentially watching, she couldn't afford to break down. "Look there," Jack said suddenly, pointing to a dust devil spinning across the plain. "You know what the Indians say about those?" Emma shook her head. "They say it's the spirits of the restless dead, searching for peace." He watched the small whirlwind dance away. "Maybe that's what we're all doing, searching for peace." A shout from town interrupted them. Someone was yelling about a fight at the saloon. Jack sighed, checking his mare's lead rope. "Duty calls. Let me walk you back first." "I can manage," Emma said, picking up her bucket. "I know you can. Question is whether you'll let me do it anyway." There was something in the way he said it, not challenging, but simply offering. That made Emma nod. They walked back more quickly, the sounds of altercation growing louder. As they reached the boarding house, Mrs. Morrison appeared on the porch. "Jack Kavanaugh, they're asking for you at the saloon. Seems your man Thompson's gotten himself into some trouble." Jack's jaw tightened. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that involves accusing Ben Hartwell of cheating at cards. Ben's got his gun out." Jack handed his mare's lead to Emma without thinking. She took it automatically, then froze as she realized their hands had almost touched. Jack was already moving toward the saloon, checking his Colt as he walked. "Wait," Emma called out. "Be careful." He glanced back, touching his hat brim. "Always am." Emma stood holding the mare's lead, her heart pounding. The horse nudged her shoulder gently, seeking attention, and Emma found herself stroking the animal's neck. The coat was dusty but warm, alive under her palm. It was the first living thing she'd voluntarily touched in 2 years. From the saloon came Jack's voice, calm and authoritative, followed by other voices raised in argument. Emma waited, hardly breathing, until she saw Jack emerge with Thompson stumbling beside him. No shots fired, no blood spilled. As Jack retrieved his horse, Emma saw the red mark on his cheek. "You're hurt. Thompson swings wild when he's drunk. It's nothing. It's not nothing." Without thinking, Emma reached toward his face, stopping just short of contact. Her hand hovered there, trembling. Jack went very still. "Emma?" She jerked her hand back, face burning. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "Don't apologize. Not for that. Not ever." They stood there in the street, dust swirling around them, the whole town seemingly holding its breath. Then Thompson groaned and vomited into the dirt, breaking the spell. "I should get him to the stable to sleep it off," Jack said reluctantly. "Yes," Emma agreed, stepping back to her safe distance. But that night, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to the wind rattle the windows, Emma pressed her palm to her cheek, remembering the heat of Jack's skin so close to her fingers. It wasn't desire she felt, that had been burned out of her, but something else, a possibility. Maybe, in the morning, she found Jack sitting at his usual table, the bruise on his cheek purple dark. When she brought his coffee, she set beside it a small jar of salve. "Mrs. Morrison's recipe," she said, "for the bruising." Jack picked up the jar, turning it in his hands. "Will you show me how to apply it?" Emma's breath caught. She knew what he was asking, not for help with the salve, but for another step forward, another small breach in her walls. I could try," she whispered. "That's all anyone can do," Jack said softly. "Try." As the morning sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor, Emma Hartley dipped her fingers in the salve and reached out once more. This time, when her fingertips brushed Jack Kavanaugh's bruised cheek, she didn't pull away. It was the lightest touch, barely there, but it was enough. Enough to prove that she could, enough to show that maybe, someday, she might be whole again. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, promising rain for the drought-stricken land, and in the kitchen of Morrison's boarding house, 2 damaged souls found a moment of healing in the simple act of human connection. The drought finally broke on a Tuesday evening. Emma stood on the back porch watching the storm clouds roll in, dark and heavy with promise. The first drops came slowly, then faster, until the rain fell in sheets that turned the dusty streets to mud within minutes. "Never thought I'd be so glad to see mud," Jack said from the doorway. He'd taken to spending his evenings at the boarding house even after his men had gone to the saloon, helping Emma with heavy work that Mrs. Morrison's aging back couldn't manage. Emma tilted her face up to catch the rain. "It smells like hope." That's a poetic way to put it. Jack stepped out onto the porch, careful to maintain the distance between them that had slowly, gradually, been shrinking over the past weeks. Most folks would just say it smells like wet dirt. Most folks haven't been as thirsty as we've been. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the thirsty earth drink in the rain. Emma had grown used to these quiet moments with Jack, these spaces where words weren't necessary. He never pushed, never asked for more than she could give, and somehow that made her want to give more. "I need to tell you something," Jack said eventually. "We'll be leaving soon. Mitchell's got his horses, and there's work waiting for us up in Wyoming." Emma's heart sank, though she tried not to show it. "When?" "End of the week, most likely. Once the roads dry out enough for traveling. 3 days." Emma gripped the porch railing, knuckles white. She'd known this was temporary, had told herself not to get attached. But somewhere between the shooting lessons and the quiet conversations, between that first tentative touch and the dozen small contacts that had followed, Jack had become essential to her daily existence. "I see," she managed. "Emma." His voice was gentle. "Look at me." She turned reluctantly. In the dim light, with the rain misting around them, Jack looked younger, almost vulnerable. "I'm not good with words," he said. "Never have been, but I need you to know, these weeks with you, they've meant something. You've meant something." "Don't," Emma whispered. "Please don't make this harder." "Harder than what? Than pretending I don't care about you? Than riding away and acting like you're not the first thing I think about in the morning and the last thing at night?" The rain intensified, drumming on the roof above them. Emma felt tears mix with raindrops on her cheeks. "You know why I can't," she said. "You know what I am. What happened to me? I know who you are." Jack corrected firmly. "A woman who survived something terrible and found the courage to keep living. A woman who makes the best biscuits in 3 states and reads to Mrs. Morrison when her eyes are too tired. A woman who learned to shoot to protect herself, but cries when she has to kill a chicken for dinner. That's not enough." Emma protested. "You need someone whole, someone who can—" "I need you," Jack interrupted. "However you come, whatever you can give." Thunder crashed overhead, making them both jump. Jack laughed softly, running a hand through his rain-dampened hair. "Come to Wyoming with me," he said suddenly. Not as anything you're not ready for, but come. There's a town there, Cheyenne, growing fast with the railroad. You could find work easy, and I'd be nearby when I'm not on the trail." Emma stared at him. "You're serious. Never been more serious about anything in my life." "Jack." She took a breath, trying to organize thoughts scattered like the raindrops. "I can barely let you touch my hand without panicking. You deserve—" "Stop telling me what I deserve," Jack said with sudden fierceness. "I'm a grown man who's made his own choices all his life, and I choose you, Emma Hartley. Today, tomorrow, however long it takes." A gust of wind drove the rain sideways, soaking them both. Emma shivered, and Jack immediately shrugged out of his coat. "Here," he said, holding it out. Emma looked at the coat, at Jack standing in the rain in his shirt sleeves, at the patient hope in his eyes. Slowly, she stepped forward and let him drape the coat around her shoulders. His hands never touched her, but she felt their warmth anyway. "I need time to think," she said. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait." That night, Emma lay awake listening to the rain, wrapped in Jack's coat that smelled of leather and soap and something uniquely him. She thought about choices and chances, about staying safe versus taking risks. She thought about her mother, who'd loved her father with a fierce devotion that had made their small homestead a heaven despite its hardships. "What would you tell me to do, Mama?" she whispered to the darkness. The only answer was the rain, but somehow Emma thought she knew anyway. The next morning, she found Jack in the stable, tending to his horses. He looked up when she entered, hope and worry warring in his expression. "I have conditions," Emma said without preamble. Jack straightened slowly. "I'm listening. I need my own room, wherever we end up. My own space, that's just mine. Done. I need to find my own work, make my own money. I won't be dependent. Wouldn't expect anything else. And this," she gestured between them. "It goes at my pace, no expectations, no timeline. Understood." Emma took a deep breath. "Then yes, I'll come to Wyoming." Jack's smile was like sunrise after a storm. He took a step toward her, then caught himself, and Emma loved him for that restraint, even as part of her wished he hadn't stopped. "There's a wagon train leaving Monday," he said. "Good folks. Safe travel. I'll arrange everything. I'll need to tell Mrs. Morrison. She's been good to me." "She knows," Jack admitted. "I might have mentioned the possibility to her already." She said to tell you she's got a niece who's been wanting to come west, so you're not leaving her short-handed." Emma shook her head, caught between exasperation and affection. "Very presumptuous of you, Mr. Kavanaugh." "I prefer optimistic," Jack said, his grin widening. "Besides, Mrs. Morrison also said if I didn't convince you to come with me, she'd box my ears for being a fool." That startled a laugh out of Emma, the sound rusty from disuse. Jack's expression softened at the sound. "I love your laugh," he said quietly. "Hope to hear it more often." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I should go. There's breakfast to prepare." "Emma," Jack's voice stopped her at the door. "Thank you for trusting me, for taking this chance." She looked back at him, standing among the horses with the morning light streaming through the stable doors. He looked solid and real and good, everything the men from her nightmares weren't. "Remember your promise," she said softly. "You'll hold my heart first." "Already do," Jack replied. "Have for weeks now." Emma fled before he could see the tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow or fear. For the first time in 2 years, they were tears of something that might have been joy. 3 days later, as the wagon train prepared to depart, Emma stood beside a loaded wagon with her few possessions, wearing a new traveling dress Mrs. Morrison had insisted on buying her. Jack sat his horse nearby, talking with the wagon master but keeping Emma in sight. "You take care of yourself, girl." "Mrs." Morrison said gruffly, pressing a small purse into Emma's hands. "And take care of that cowboy, too. Good men are scarcer than water out here." "I will," Emma promised, embracing the older woman briefly. As the wagon train began to move, Jack rode up beside the wagon where Emma sat. "Ready for an adventure?" he asked. Emma looked ahead at the trail stretching toward distant mountains, then at the man who'd shown her that healing was possible, that trust could be rebuilt one small step at a time. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm ready." The wheels began to turn, carrying her toward a new life, a new chance, and as Willow Creek faded behind them, Emma Hartley allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the best parts of her story were still to be written. Cheyenne was nothing like Willow Creek. The railroad town bustled with life, new buildings rising from the prairie like mushrooms after rain. Emma found work quickly at the Grand Hotel, a 2-story establishment that catered to railroad men and cattle buyers. Jack had been true to his word. She had her own small room above the kitchen, and he'd taken a job with a local rancher, close enough to visit but far enough to give her space. For 3 months, life settled into a rhythm. Emma grew stronger, more confident. She could serve tables without flinching when customers got too close, could walk the streets alone without constantly looking over her shoulder. Jack came by twice a week, always respectful, always patient, and their friendship deepened into something that made her heart race with anticipation rather than fear. Then Marcus Wheeler arrived in town. Emma saw him first from the hotel's upper window, a tall man in a black coat dismounting from a dust-covered horse. Something about his posture, the way he surveyed the street like he owned it, made her stomach clench. When he turned and she glimpsed the badge on his vest, her blood ran cold. Deputy Marshal, the same kind of badge worn by the man who'd found her after the attack, who'd asked all those terrible questions, who'd looked at her with eyes that said he knew exactly what had happened and found it interesting. "Emma, table 6 needs coffee." Martha, the head waitress, called from below. Emma forced herself to move, to go downstairs, to work. Maybe Wheeler would take a room somewhere else. Maybe he was just passing through. But of course he wasn't. He walked into the Grand Hotel's dining room that evening, black coat swirling, and chose a table in Emma's section. Up close, she could see he wasn't the same man from Kansas, but the resemblance was strong enough to make her hands shake as she approached. "Evening, Marshal," she managed. "What can I get you?" Wheeler looked up, and Emma's heart stopped. His eyes were pale blue, cold as winter sky, and they traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. Well, you're new here. His smile didn't reach those cold eyes. Marcus Wheeler, deputy marshal out of Denver. And you are? Emma. The special tonight is beef stew. Emma. He drew out her name like he was tasting it. Pretty name for a pretty girl. You been in Cheyenne long? Few months. Would you like to order? No hurry. I'll be in town a while. Here on official business. He leaned back, still studying her. You seem familiar. We met before. No, sir. I'll give you a moment to decide. Emma retreated, her heart hammering. In the kitchen, she leaned against the wall, trying to breathe. Martha found her there. You all right, honey? You look pale as flour. I'm fine. Just that marshal makes me nervous. Martha's expression darkened. Marcus Wheeler's bad news comes through every few months, supposedly looking for outlaws. But mostly, he just causes trouble. You stay clear of him. Here? But staying clear proved impossible. Wheeler took a room at the hotel and made a point of requiring service at odd hours. He'd catch Emma in the hallways, standing too close, asking questions about where she'd come from, why she'd left. Must have been something serious to make a young woman travel alone, he said one evening, blocking her path to the stairs. Man trouble, maybe. Some cowboy break your heart. Excuse me, I have work to do. Always in such a hurry. He didn't move. You know, you remind me of a girl I knew in Kansas. Poor thing had suffered terribly. Some men had, well, it wasn't pretty. She ran off before the trial. We never did catch those men without her testimony. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. He knew, somehow. He knew. I don't know anything about that, she whispered. No, pity. There's still a reward for information about those raiders. Wheeler finally stepped aside. You think on it. Miss Emma. My door's always open if you remember something. That night, Emma huddled in her room, fighting the urge to run again. But where would she go? And what about Jack? The thought of leaving him made her chest ache. Jack noticed something was wrong the moment he saw her the next day. They were at their usual spot by the river outside town, where Emma had been practicing her shooting. She'd gotten good enough to hit 6 bottles in a row without missing. What's happened? He asked directly. You look like you haven't slept. Emma told him everything, words tumbling out in a rush. Jack's expression grew darker with every sentence. He threatened you? Not exactly, but he knows who I am. Jack, he knows about Kansas. Jack was on his feet, pacing. I'll talk to him. No! Emma grabbed his arm without thinking, then jerked back. But Jack caught her hand gently, holding it. Emma, look at me. She met his eyes, seeing fury there, but not directed at her, never at her. No one threatens you. No one makes you afraid. Not while I'm breathing. He's a marshal. Jack, you can't just watch me. But Emma held tighter to his hand, the first time she'd initiated such contact. Please, don't make this worse. Maybe he'll leave soon. Jack's jaw clenched, but he nodded slowly. All right, but I'm staying in town until he goes, and you don't go anywhere alone. Wheeler didn't leave. Instead, his attention intensified. He'd appear wherever Emma went, always watching, always with that knowing smile. He started telling stories at dinner, loud enough for her to hear, about women who'd been ruined and the men who were foolish enough to want them anyway. Course, any man who'd take up with damaged goods is a fool, he said one night, his eyes on Emma as she served nearby tables. Probably something wrong with him too. Weak, maybe, or worse. Emma's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped a tray. That night, she found Jack waiting outside the hotel. Pack your things, he said quietly. We're leaving. Jack, he's not going to stop. Emma, men like that, they're like wolves. They pick out the wounded prey and run it to ground. His hands clenched and unclenched. I won't let him do that to you. Running makes me look guilty. Of what? Surviving? Jack's voice was fierce. You've done nothing wrong. They were so focused on each other that neither noticed Wheeler approaching until he spoke. Well, is this the cowboy you've been stepping out with, Miss Emma? Wheeler's hand rested casually on his gun. "Jack Kavanaugh, isn't it? Heard about you. Killed a man in Colorado last year?" "It was self-defense," Jack said evenly. "So you say. Still, violent men often claim self-defense." Wheeler's smile was sharp. "Especially men who associate with questionable women." Jack moved so fast Emma barely saw it. One moment Wheeler was smirking, the next he was against the wall with Jack's forearm across his throat. "You say one more word about her," Jack growled. "And Marshall or not, I'll—" "Jack, no!" Emma grabbed his arm. "This is what he wants. Please!" For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Jack stepped back, breathing hard. Wheeler straightened his coat, his smile now triumphant. "Assaulting a federal marshal. That's prison time. Kavanaugh?" He looked at Emma. "Unless, of course, Miss Emma here wants to discuss a deal. My room. 1 hour. We can work something out." The implication hung in the air like poison. Emma felt something snap inside her. 2 years of fear crystallizing into rage. "No," she said, her voice stronger than it had been since that night in Kansas. "I'm done being afraid of men like you." Wheeler's eyes narrowed. "You might want to reconsider." She said no. The new voice came from behind them. Sheriff Tom Morrison, no relation to Mrs. Morrison from Willow Creek, stood there with 2 deputies, his weathered face stern. "Evening, Marshal Wheeler. Having some trouble?" "These 2 assaulted me. That's not what I saw," the sheriff interrupted. "What I saw was you harassing a citizen and threatening a man who defended her. Now, I've had several complaints about your behavior during your stay. I think it's time you moved on." Wheeler's face flushed. "You can't run me out of town. I'm a federal marshal. And I'm the duly elected sheriff of this county. You've got no active warrants to pursue here, no official business left. I'm asking you politely to leave. Don't make me ask impolitely." For a moment, the street was silent except for the distant sound of the saloon piano. Then Wheeler smiled, cold and mean. "This isn't over," he said, looking at Emma. "Some things follow you wherever you run." He turned and strode away. Emma sagged against Jack, who wrapped an arm around her shoulders. For once, she didn't pull away. "Thank you, Sheriff," Jack said. Morrison nodded. "Marcus Wheeler's been a problem everywhere he goes. I'll make sure he leaves town tonight." He tipped his hat to Emma. "Ma'am, if he bothers you again, you come straight to me." After the sheriff left, Emma and Jack stood in the street, both shaking with leftover adrenaline. "You stood up to him," Jack said softly. "You faced him down. I was terrified. But you did it anyway. That's what courage is." Emma looked up at him. This man who'd been willing to fight a marshal for her, who saw her strength instead of her damage. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words surprising them both. Jack's eyes widened, then softened. "Emma, I know I'm not ready for everything, but I needed you to know. In case he comes back, in case something happens." "Nothing's going to happen," Jack said firmly. "And I love you too. Have since you set that cup of coffee on my table with shaking hands and eyes full of fear and courage both. Standing there in the dusty street, with the stars beginning to appear overhead." Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years. Safe. Not because the danger was gone, but because she'd faced it. Because she'd chosen to stand and fight instead of run. Wheeler would leave town that night, though his threat would linger. But Emma had found something stronger than fear. She'd found her voice again, and the courage to use it. And beside her stood a man who'd wait as long as it took for all of her walls to come down, who'd hold her heart just as he'd promised. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, Emma believed she could win it. The day Marcus Wheeler returned to Cheyenne began like any other. Emma was arranging flowers in the hotel lobby when she glanced through the window and saw him dismounting at the sheriff's office. Her blood turned to ice, but this time, something else rose alongside the fear, determination. She found Jack at the stockyards, helping load cattle onto railroad cars. He took one look at her face and knew. "He's back," she said simply. Jack's expression hardened. "Stay at the hotel. No." Emma's voice was firm. I'm done hiding. Jack, whatever he wants, it's time to face it. That evening, Sheriff Morrison called a town meeting. The hotel's dining room filled with concerned citizens as Wheeler stood at the front, his marshal's badge gleaming in the lamplight. "I'm here on official business," Wheeler announced. 3 years ago, a homestead outside Topeka was attacked. A man and woman killed. Terrible violence. The perpetrators were never caught because the only witness, a young woman, disappeared before the trial. His eyes found Emma in the crowd. She sat between Jack and Martha, her hands clenched in her lap but her head high. "I have reason to believe that witness is here in Cheyenne," Wheeler continued, "living under a false name, hiding from justice." "That's a serious accusation," Sheriff Morrison said. "You have proof?" "I have this." Wheeler produced a yellowed paper. "A statement from the doctor who examined the survivor. Describes her quite clearly. More importantly, it describes certain injuries that would leave lasting marks." Emma felt the room's attention shift to her. The old shame tried to rise, but she pushed it down. Jack's hand found hers under the table, steady and warm. "What exactly are you suggesting, Marshal?" Morrison asked. "I'm suggesting that Emma here is actually Emily Hartford, the missing witness, and I'm prepared to arrest her for obstruction of justice unless she agrees to return with me to testify." "That's not her name," someone said from the back of the room. Everyone turned. Mrs. Chen, who ran the laundry, stood up. "I knew Emily Hartford in Kansas. This isn't her." Wheeler's face darkened. "You're mistaken." "No mistake." Mr. Rodriguez, the blacksmith, stood as well. "I knew the Hartford family too. This young lady isn't their daughter." One by one, people throughout the room stood. The baker, the school teacher, even crusty old Pete, who traveled from Willow Creek to visit his sister. They all swore Emma wasn't Emily Hartford. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she understood. They were protecting her, this community that had taken her in. "You're all lying," Wheeler snarled. "I know who she is, what she is." "And what is she?" Jack stood slowly, his voice dangerous. "Say it plain. Wheeler, tell everyone here what you've been implying in Corners and Shadows." Wheeler's face flushed. "She's a woman who was violated, ruined, and she ran instead of seeing justice done." The room erupted in angry murmurs. Sheriff Morrison banged his gavel for order. "Marshal Wheeler," Morrison said coldly. "Even if this woman were Emily Hartford, which these good people say she's not, what kind of lawman hounds a victim of violence? What kind of justice demands she relive her trauma for your satisfaction? The kind that catches killers," Wheeler shot back. "Those men are still out there because she ran." "No." Emma's quiet words silenced the room. She stood, Jack rising beside her. "They're not out there," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Because they're dead." Wheeler's eyes narrowed. "What?" "The cavalry didn't scare them off that day. They killed them, all 5. I watched from the root cellar window, watched them hang what was left from a tree." Emma lifted her chin. "There was no trial because there was no one left to try. The marshal who found me knew it. He wrote it in his report. You're lying. She's not." Sheriff Morrison held up a telegram. "Came this afternoon after you visited my office. I wired Kansas. The Hartford case was closed 3 years ago. All perpetrators deceased. No witness testimony needed." The room was dead silent. Wheeler's face had gone pale, then red. "Then why?" he demanded. "Why hide? Why run?" Emma looked him straight in the eye. "Because of men like you. Men who look at a woman who suffered and see not a person but an opportunity. Men who think violation gives them rights to violate again." "How dare you?" "I dare because I'm done being afraid." Emma's voice rang out clear and strong. "Yes, I'm Emily Hartford. Yes, I survived something horrible. And yes, I ran. I ran from the stares and whispers, from the people who thought they owned my story, from men who thought my pain made me available for their use." She felt Jack step closer, not touching but present, and drew strength from him. "But I'm not running anymore," she continued. This is my home. These are my people. And you have no power here. Wheeler's hand moved toward his gun. 20 men in the room shifted, hands dropping to their own weapons. Jack stepped partially in front of Emma, shielding her. Think real careful about your next move. Marshal, Morrison said quietly, you're outnumbered and out of line. For a long moment, the tension stretched tight as wire. Then Wheeler's hand dropped. This isn't over, he hissed. I'll have your badge, Morrison. And you. He looked at Emma with pure hatred. You'll regret this. The only thing I regret, Emma said clearly, is letting fear of men like you steal 2 years of my life. Wheeler stormed out, the door slamming behind him. The room stayed silent for a moment. Then Martha started clapping. Others joined in. Not celebration, but support. Acknowledgement of courage recognized. Emma sank into her chair, shaking. Jack knelt beside her, his eyes full of pride and concern. You did it, he said softly. You faced him down in front of everyone. I couldn't have without you, without all of you. She looked around the room at faces filled with respect, not pity or disgust. I thought if people knew. We know you're brave. Mrs. Chen said firmly. We know you're strong. That's all that matters. Sheriff Morrison approached. Wheeler will file complaints, make trouble. You might have to testify to officials. Tell your story again. Emma nodded. I know, but I'll do it as Emma Hartley, the woman I chose to become, not as the victim I was. That night, as the town settled back to normal, Emma and Jack walked along the river. The stars reflected in the water, and somewhere an owl called. I'm proud of you, Jack said. Proud beyond words. I couldn't have done it without knowing you were there, without knowing you'd stand between me and danger. Jack stopped walking, turning to face her. Emma, I need you to know something. I will always stand for you, but today you proved you can stand for yourself. You don't need me to be strong. No, Emma agreed, stepping closer to him than she ever had before. But I want you there anyway. She reached up slowly, giving him time to pull back, and touched his face. Her fingers traced the jaw she'd memorized from safe distances, the cheekbone she'd treated for bruises months ago. Emma, Jack breathed, holding perfectly still. I'm not afraid anymore, she whispered. Not of you. Never of you. Are you sure? Instead of answering, Emma rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, but it was hers to give. Jack's arms came around her carefully, holding her like she was precious and strong all at once. When they pulled apart, both were crying. I love you, Jack said. All of you, past, present, future. Whatever you can give, whenever you can give it. I know, Emma said, wonder in her voice. I finally know. They walked back to town hand in hand, Emma's head high. She was Emily Hartford, who had survived horror. She was Emma Hartley, who had chosen her own path. She was a woman who had faced down her demons in front of witnesses and emerged victorious. Wheeler would leave town that night and not return, his authority undermined by a community that chose compassion over complicity. There would be official inquiries, as Morrison predicted. But Emma would face them with Jack beside her and a town behind her. The girl who couldn't bear to be touched had become a woman who chose when and how to reach out. The victim had become a victor. And in the grand hotel of a frontier town, Emma Hartley finally stopped running and started living. The gunshot shattered the evening quiet like breaking glass. Emma dropped the water bucket she'd been carrying, her heart hammering as she recognized Jack's voice shouting from Main Street. Without thinking, she ran toward the sound, her feet flying over the wooden sidewalks. She found chaos. Jack lay in the dusty street, blood spreading from his chest, while Sheriff Morrison held a smoking Wheeler at gunpoint. The marshal's face was twisted with rage and madness. Jack! Emma fell to her knees beside him, her hands pressing against the wound without hesitation. The blood was warm and terrifying, but all she could think about was keeping it inside him where it belonged. Emma! Jack gasped, his face pale. "You're touching me. Don't you dare die on me, Jack Kavanaugh," she said fiercely, pressing harder. "Not now. Not when I finally—" Doc Williams pushed through the gathering crowd, his medical bag in hand. "Let me see. Good. Keep pressure on it. Emma, just like that." Around them, the town erupted. Wheeler was shouting about justice and rights, but Morrison's deputies were already dragging him away. Emma heard none of it. Her world had narrowed to Jack's face, to keeping her hand steady on his wound, to willing him to keep breathing. "Always knew. You were strong," Jack managed, attempting a smile. "Save your strength," Emma ordered, but tears were streaming down her face. "Doc, please." "We need to get him inside. The hotel's closest." Doc Williams gestured to several men. "Careful now. Lift together." Emma never let go. As they carried Jack into the hotel, her hands stayed pressed to his chest, her dress soaking with his blood. She'd spent 2 years afraid of touching anyone, and now she couldn't bear to stop touching him. They laid Jack on a table in the dining room, now cleared of guests. Doc Williams worked with swift efficiency, cutting away Jack's shirt, examining the wound. "Bullet's still in there," he muttered. "Emma, I need you to—" "I'm not leaving," she said flatly. "I was going to say I need you to help. Wash your hands. Then hold this while I work." For the next hour, Emma assisted Doc Williams with steady hands and unwavering focus. She'd helped her mother with birthing and injuries on their homestead, and that knowledge came back now when she needed it most. Jack drifted in and out of consciousness, but each time his eyes opened, they found hers. "The bullet's out," Doc finally announced. "Exhausted. Missed the vital organs, but he's lost a lot of blood. The next day or two will tell." They moved Jack to Emma's room, the closest available. She sat beside the bed, holding his hand, afraid to let go. Martha brought her clean clothes, food she couldn't eat, updates from outside. Wheeler had been arrested for attempted murder. He'd apparently snapped after being dismissed from the Marshal Service following complaints from Cheyenne. He'd come back for revenge. And Jack had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right time, as he'd stepped between Wheeler and Emma once again. "You should rest," Martha said gently. "I can't." Emma smoothed Jack's hair back from his fevered forehead. What if I let go and he—" "Then you hold on," Martha said simply, understanding. "You hold on tight as you need to." Through that first terrible night, Emma talked to Jack. She told him about the homestead before the attack, about her mother's garden and her father's terrible jokes. She told him about learning to make preserves and mend fences. She told him about the good memories she'd buried along with the bad. When dawn came, Jack's fever broke. His eyes opened, clearer than they'd been, and found her still there, still holding his hand. "Told you," he whispered hoarsely. "Told you I'd hold your heart first." Emma laughed through her tears. "You did, but I think I'm holding yours now too." Fair trade. Doc Williams arrived to check the wound, nodding with satisfaction. "He'll mend. Few weeks of rest and he'll be good as new." He looked at Emma's exhausted face. "You, however, need sleep. I'll sleep when he's better." "Emma," Jack squeezed her hand weakly. "Please, I'm not going anywhere." Reluctantly, Emma curled up in the chair beside the bed, still holding his hand. She slept fitfully, waking often to check that he was still breathing, that the bandages were still clean, that this wasn't another nightmare. On the 3rd day, Jack was able to sit up. On the 5th, he took a few steps, and through it all, Emma was there, touching him, holding him, caring for him with hands that no longer shook with fear but with tenderness. "You've changed," Jack said one evening as Emma helped him back into bed after a short walk. "Yes." She sat beside him, taking his hand automatically now. I think I was so focused on what was taken from me that I forgot what I still had to give." "And what's that?" Emma looked at their joined hands. "Love, care, touch that heals instead of harms." She met his eyes. "You showed me that, by being patient, by waiting, by letting me choose. Emma, Jack's voice was rough with emotion. When I saw you lying there bleeding, she continued, all I could think was that I'd wasted so much time being afraid, time we could have had together, time I could have spent loving you properly instead of from a safe distance. Jack pulled her closer with his good arm. Emma went willingly, carefully arranging herself against his uninjured side. It was the closest they'd ever been, and instead of fear, she felt only rightness. We have time now, Jack said into her hair. All the time in the world. Wheeler? Going to territorial prison? Morrison made sure of it. He won't hurt anyone again. Emma relaxed against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her palm. I'm not afraid anymore. Jack, not of the past, not of being touched, not of loving you fully. I know, Jack said softly. You proved that when you put your hands on my wound without hesitating, when you stayed with me, touched me, held me together with your own hands. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set outside the window. Tomorrow, Jack would be strong enough to move back to his own lodgings. There would be decisions to make about the future, about whether to stay in Cheyenne or find somewhere new to build a life together. But for now, Emma held the man she loved, her hands gentle on his healing body, her heart open and unafraid. The girl who couldn't bear to be touched had become a woman who understood that touch could heal as surely as it could harm. And in choosing to reach out despite her fear, she'd found not just love, but herself. I love you, she whispered against Jack's shoulder. I love you too, he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Thank you for holding on. Always, Emma promised. Always. Outside, Cheyenne bustled with its usual energy. But inside the quiet room, two souls who'd found each other across pain and fear rested in the peace of love, hard won and freely given. The wounds of the past would always be there, like Jack's new scar, but they no longer defined the future. Emma had learned to touch again. Jack had learned to wait, and together, they'd learned that sometimes the greatest courage was simply reaching out, one gentle touch at a time. Spring arrived in Cheyenne with a burst of wildflowers and warm Chinook winds. The prairie, so long brown and dormant, erupted in yellows and purples that stretched to the horizon. Emma stood on the hill overlooking the valley, her hands secure in Jack's, watching the sunrise paint the landscape in gold. 6 months had passed since Wheeler's attack. Jack's wound had healed, leaving only a scar over his heart, a mark he claimed with pride, saying it showed where Emma had held him together. Wheeler himself was serving 20 years in territorial prison, his career and freedom ended by his own hatred. It's beautiful, Emma said, breathing in the sweet morning air. Not as beautiful as you, Jack replied, then laughed when she rolled her eyes. I know, but it's true. Emma turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face with easy familiarity. The woman who once flinched from every contact now sought his touch, offered her own freely. You're incorrigible, Mr. Kavanaugh, and you love me anyway. I do, she said simply. More than I ever thought possible. They'd chosen to stay in Cheyenne, building a life in the town that had sheltered them both. Jack had started his own freight company with the money he'd saved, while Emma had become part owner of the Grand Hotel after Martha decided to retire. They worked side by side, partners in business as well as love. I have something to ask you, Jack said, suddenly serious. Emma felt her heart skip. They'd talked about marriage, but she'd asked him to wait until she was ready. Not because she didn't love him, but because she wanted to come to it whole, not as someone seeking protection, but as someone choosing partnership. Ask, she said softly. Jack took both her hands, his thumbs stroking over her knuckles. Emma Hartley, you've taught me patience and shown me strength I didn't know existed. You've trusted me with your heart and your truth. Will you trust me with your future too? Will you marry me? Emma felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Jack Kavanaugh, I'll marry you. He whooped, lifting her and spinning her around. Emma laughed, her arms around his neck. No fear in the embrace, only love. When he set her down, she kissed him deeply, pouring all her love and trust into the contact. "When?" Jack asked when they finally parted. "Soon." Emma decided. "I don't want to wait anymore. I've done enough waiting for one lifetime." They were married 3 weeks later, on a perfect May morning with the whole town in attendance. Emma wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered by Mrs. Chen. Jack stood at the altar in his best suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle alone, not given away by anyone, but choosing her own path as she always had. Sheriff Morrison officiated, his gruff voice surprisingly tender as he spoke about courage and choice, about two people who'd found each other in difficult circumstances and chosen to build something beautiful from the ashes of pain. "Emma," Jack said when it came time for vows, "I promised once that I'd hold your heart first. You trusted me with that precious gift, and I swear to guard it all my days. But more than that, I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you, to be your partner, not your protector, to love you for the fierce, brave woman you are." Emma's voice was clear and strong as she spoke her own vows. "Jack, you showed me that gentleness could exist in strength, that patience was its own form of love. You waited for me to find my way back to myself, and then you loved who I became. I promise to match your courage with my own, to build a life with you based on trust and choice, and to never stop choosing you, every single day." When Morrison pronounced them married, Emma grabbed Jack's face and kissed him thoroughly, to the delight of the crowd. There was no hesitation, no fear, only a woman claiming her husband with joy and certainty. The reception was held at the Grand Hotel. The dining room Emma had once crept through in fear, now filled with laughter and celebration. She danced with Jack, their bodies moving together easily, her head on his shoulder. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "None," Emma assured him. "This is exactly where I want to be." As the evening wound down, they slipped away to the small house Jack had built on the edge of town. It wasn't large, but it was theirs. A place where Emma could feel safe and Jack could hang his hat, where they could build a future together. On the porch, Jack paused. "Should I carry you over the threshold?" Emma laughed. "If you'd like, I'm not afraid." He swept her into his arms, and she went willingly, her own arms around his neck. Inside, their new home waited, furniture they'd chosen together, curtains Emma had sewn, a kitchen where she could cook without watching doors, a bedroom where touch meant love, not fear. Jack set her down gently, his hands framing her face. "Welcome home, Mrs. Kavanaugh." "Home," Emma repeated, tasting the word. For so long, she'd been running, seeking safety in distance and isolation. But home, she'd learned, wasn't a place, it was a choice, a person, a love strong enough to overcome the past. That night, as they lay together, Emma traced the scar over Jack's heart. "This is where I held you," she murmured. "This is where you saved me," Jack corrected, catching her hand and pressing it flat against his chest. "Not just from Wheeler's bullet, but from a life half-lived. You taught me that love could be patient, that waiting for the right person was worth any amount of time. We saved each other," Emma said, snuggling closer. "And now we get to live. Really live." Outside their window, the stars wheeled overhead in the vast Wyoming sky. The coyotes called to each other across the prairie, and the night wind whispered through the new grass. But inside, two people who'd found their way through fear and pain to love rested in each other's arms, no longer afraid of the dark or what it might bring. The next morning, Emma woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and Jack's arm around her waist. She turned in his embrace, studying his sleeping face, the lines that spoke of laughter and weather, the scar on his jaw, the peace that softened his features. "I can feel you staring," he murmured without opening his eyes. "I'm admiring my husband," Emma said, delighting in the word. "I'm allowed." Jack's eyes opened, warm with love. "And I'm admiring my wife, the bravest woman in Wyoming." Just Wyoming? Emma teased. The whole frontier, the whole world. He pulled her closer. My Emma. My Jack, she responded, sealing it with a kiss. Later, as Emma made breakfast in her new kitchen while Jack fed the horses, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a terrified girl hiding in a root cellar to a woman who'd faced down her demons in public. From someone who couldn't bear the slightest touch to a wife who reached for her husband with easy affection. The scars remained. They always would. There were still nights when nightmares came, moments when shadows held threats. But Jack was there for those times, just as she was there for his own dark moments. They'd learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing the future. One day at a time, as the sun climbed higher over the prairie, painting their new life in shades of gold and possibility. Emma stood on her porch and breathed deeply of the sweet morning air. Jack came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, and she leaned back into him without hesitation. What are you thinking? He asked. That I'm glad I stayed that night in Willow Creek. Glad I didn't run when you sat at that corner table. Glad I found the courage to let you in. I'll hold your heart first, Jack quoted softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. And now you hold me. Emma completed, turning in his arms to face him. All of me, forever. As they stood there, wrapped in each other in the morning light, the frontier stretched endless around them, not empty or threatening now, but full of promise. They'd both come to this wild land seeking something. Jack seeking purpose after loss, Emma seeking safety after violence. Instead, they'd found each other, and in finding each other, they'd found themselves. The girl who was afraid to be touched had become a woman who knew that love, real love, was worth the risk of reaching out. And the patient cowboy who'd promised to hold her heart first had kept that promise and gained his own heart's desire in return. In the end, that's what the frontier was really about. Not just taming the land, but finding the courage to build something new from whatever pieces you carried with you. Emma and Jack had taken their broken pieces and forged them into something stronger. A love that could weather any storm the Wild West might send their way. And as the morning gave way to afternoon, as life in Cheyenne continued its steady rhythm, Emma Kavanaugh went about her day with hands that no longer shook, a heart that no longer hid, and a love that no longer waited but lived, fully and freely, under the endless western sky. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and let's connect across the miles. Just like the frontier brought people together. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of courage, love, and redemption from America's frontier days. What did you think of Emma and Jack's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one.